Hola amigos, yo soy Dr. Lebrun y hoy vamos a hablar sobre Lazarillo de Tormes. So in this video we'll go back and forth between Spanish and English. English so you can understand the information at a deeper level, and Spanish so that you can write about this information and be successful on your test. And we'll try a practice activity at the end of the video. Alright, vamos a empezar. Alright, aquí vamos a hablar un poco sobre el autor y el movimiento literario. El autor es anónimo porque tiene miedo de la Inquisición. El movimiento es la literatura picaresca, cual es parte del Siglo de Oro y viene de los años 1500. Y cuenta de la vida de los pícaros, los niños pobres que viven en la calle y tienen que robar para comer. Alright, so the author is anonymous because he or she has fear of the Spanish Inquisition. So there's a small part to the story where there's a priest that doesn't quite follow his religious beliefs, and that's the reason why the author might have fear of the Spanish Inquisition. And so it's the picaresque style literature, which deals with the picaros, which are pickpockets or these poor children that are living on the streets. And it's kind of ironic because this is Spain's golden age of Spanish literature and just Spain's golden age in general because of all the gold and wealth and silver that was coming in from the Americas into Spain. But at the same time, you've got extreme poverty, and this novel kind of portrays what life may have really been like for the common person in Spain. All right, aquí tenemos unos recursos literarios. So el lector, la persona que está leyendo la novela, y prosa es una expresión natural del lenguaje. So some literary devices you might be required to write about on your test. So the reader is the person that's reading the novel, and prose means it's just written out in story format, how you would naturally express language. All right, unas palabras cambiadas. Muchacho, más, but, ansí, así, casi, mismo. All right, so this story is about 500 years old, and you can see that the Spanish language has changed a little bit in the orthography or the spelling. So muchacho for boy may have been mochacho, as we see it in the story. And typically for but, the conjunction, we use perro in Spanish, but a long time ago they used the word más without the accent. So if you were to type más like you were meaning more with the accent, it wouldn't know the difference because más without the accent and más with the accent are both words. But in this story, a lot of times instead of saying pero for but, they're saying más without the accent. Okay, así for so, they've got an extra n there, ansí. And then casi for almost, it's got an extra letter in there, quasi. And then same thing for mismo, for the same, just one letter has been changed slightly, mismo. All right, so you just have to be a little bit flexible with some of the spelling because the language is a little bit older than we might be used to reading. All right, vamos a hablar sobre el trato primero. El padre de Lazarillo muere, la madre de Lazarillo mándale a un ciego como su amo, y el ciego dice, me recibía no por mozo, sino por hijo. All right, so just a little bit of background information from the first chapter of the story. Lazarillo's father has died, and so his mother is having trouble taking care of him and paying for his food, and she remarries, so maybe she's not so much interested in the child from the first marriage. But anyways, this nice blind man comes by who's looking for a helper, and so she sends Lazarillo on his way with the blind man, and the blind man says, I would not receive him as a helper, but as my own child. So it sounds like it's going to be a good fit, but let's see what happens in the story. All right, ya vamos a hablar un poco más sobre el primer amo de Lazarillo, el ciego. En el libro cuenta que el ciego ganaba más en un mes que 100 ciegos en un año, haciendo cosas como pronósticos, oraciones, medicina. So the first owner of Lazarillo, or first custodian, is the blind man. And it says that the blind man earned more in 1 month than 100 blind men in a year. So the blind man was very astute at doing what he did. And so what were some ways that he earned money? Pronosticos, he could predict if a pregnant lady was going to have a boy or a girl. He could give prayers. He could come up with different medicines, different herbal remedies. And these may have worked, or maybe they didn't, but that's how the blind man earned more in 1 month than 100 blind men in a year. So he was good at what he did. All right, so that indicates that he had some money coming in, but let's take a look at what happens with Lazarillo. All right, la trampa. Lázaro llega el oído a este toro y oirás gran ruido dentro de él. Diome una gran calabazada en el diablo del toro. Y el ciego dice, necio, aprende que el mozo del ciego un punto ha de saber más que el diablo. So the first thing that happens with a blind man in Lazarillo as they're leaving the city is the blind man teaches him a lesson. He says, Lazarillo, put your ear against this bull, which is a statue made out of stone, and you will hear a big noise inside of him. And when Lazarillo does that, the blind man takes Lazarillo's head and smashes it into the bull. And he says, fool, you need to learn that the helper of a blind man has to be sharper than the devil. So he's teaching him a lesson to begin with. Right, la venganza. El ciego tiene comida, pero no comparte poco con Lazarillo. Lazarillo roba vino y uvas del ciego, y Lazarillo burla al ciego. El ciego salta contra un poste con las instrucciones del Lazarillo. So because the blind man can't see, Lazarillo is able to do some tricks on the blind man to get some wine and some grapes and some bread, because the blind man, even though he has lots of food and money, he doesn't like to share with Lazarillo. And then eventually, when Lazarillo has had enough of the abuse, he has the blind man jump into a pillar, thinking that he's crossing a stream. And so Lazarillo gets his revenge on the blind man, and then he's on to his next owner. All right, el segundo amo de Lazarillo es el sacerdote. So el cura tiene comida cerrada con llave en un arcaz, pero le da cebollas a Lazarillo, y Lazarillo consigue llave y roba pan del arcaz. All right, so this is probably the reason why the Spanish Inquisition banned this book from being read and why the author was anonymous, because he didn't want to get in trouble with the Spanish Inquisition. So the priest should be sharing with Lazarillo because that's his job, but the priest locks up all his food in this big wooden chest, and he only gives Lazarillo onions to eat. But eventually this iron worker comes by offering his services, and Lazarillo has him make a key for this chest, and he pays the iron worker with a loaf of bread inside the chest. So now Lazarillo has the key to get into this chest filled with food that the priest doesn't want him to have access to. All right, el sacerdote piensa que ratones o posiblemente una culebra están robando la comida. El sacerdote encuentra la llave en la boca de Lazarillo y le da un golpe en la cabeza de Lazarillo. So here we have an example of the more violence in the story. At first, the priest thinks that maybe it's mice or that it's a snake that are getting into this wooden chest. So Lazarillo keeps drilling holes into the wooden chest. The priest keeps filling the holes, and the holes keep reappearing. Then they think maybe it's a snake that's getting into the chest. Lazarillo suggests that maybe they put a piece of cheese in there to catch the animal, and then Lazarillo eats it. And then eventually the priest finds Lazarillo sleeping with the key in his mouth. It makes a whistling sound. And then when the priest discovers this, he hits Lazarillo in the head and injures him. And then Lazarillo is on his way to his next owner. All right, el tercer amo, el escudero. El escudero parece rico, pero no lo es. Él es simpático con Lazarillo, y la ironía es que Lazarillo comparte su comida con el escudero. All right, so the third owner of Lazarillo, the third caretaker, is a squire. So he works with the nobility. He appears rich, but he isn't rich at all. But the other thing is he is actually nice to Lazarillo, so that's a good thing. And the part that's ironic is that Lazarillo then shares his food with the escudero, and it's supposed to be the other way around. All right, más amos. So then Lazarillo continues on with more owners. Amo cuatro, un fraile de la Merced. Amo cinco, un bulero. Amo seis, un pintor. Amo siete, un alguacil. All right, so he goes on from owner to owner. Number 4 is a friar. Number 5, un bulero, somebody that sells letters that pardon sins. Supposed to be coming from the Pope, but he's a phony. Owner number 6 is a painter. Owner number 7 is a sheriff. And so the craziness kind of continues. All right, y al fin del cuento. Lazarillo se casa con una criada, la hija del arzobispo, y ellos rentan una casita. So in the end of the story, everything kind of works out for Lazarillo. He eventually marries this young maid. She's the daughter of the archbishop, and eventually they rent a house, and everything works out for Lazarillo in the end. So happy story. All right, vamos a hacer una práctica, la ironía. Da ejemplos de la apariencia falsa de los primeros tres amos. All right, so I'll give you a little bit of time to work. Just pause the video, but see if you can give an example of the false appearances of the first 3 caretakers of Lazarillo, and I'll give you my interpretation in just a moment. All right, aquí hay las respuestas que yo tengo sobre la ironía y las apariencias falsas del cuento. El ciego tiene dinero y comida. Él dice que va a tratar bien a Lazarillo, pero es cruel con Lazarillo. El cura tiene comida. Él es un religioso, pero no sigue las reglas de su fe. No comparte con Lazarillo. En el escudero, aunque parece rico, es pobre. Y Lazarillo tiene que apoyar a su amo. All right, so here's some examples of the irony with the first 3 owners and some false appearances. Is the blind man, he has money and food, and he says that he's going to treat Lazarillo well, but he doesn't like to share his food with Lazarillo, and he's actually really cruel and mean and abusive to Lazarillo. All right, the cura, the priest, he has food also, and he's religious, and he's supposed to follow the rules of his faith and share and treat others how he'd want to be treated, but he doesn't follow those rules. He doesn't share the food with Lazarillo, so that's kind of ironic. And the squire is his 3rd owner. He appears rich, and so Lazarillo thinks he's into a good situation, but he's actually poor. And then actually the irony is that Lazarillo has to support his owner. All right, so those are some examples of the irony and false appearances in the story. All right, gracias por ver y buena suerte en su examen grande. Hasta pronto. Chao. Nos vemos.